Hey, this is Jon Reed, and welcome to the Acumatica Summit Review 2025. This one's a little bit different. I'm going to explain why. Hi, Brian Sommer. Thanks for joining me. So,
As you could tell, I'm in a much better locale than John's corner of his office there. But anyway, keep going.
indeed, Brian has the better weather. I have the better audio setup. But we're winging it because basically what happened is during my winter event travels, I picked up something that I shouldn't have, and I am grounded. I'm on the home front. I'm recovering, but we really didn't want to miss this opportunity. Brian being on the ground in Vegas, hunting down fresh insights on Acumatica to find out what we learned, and I think there's a couple of surprises in store for a lot of different reasons. So this should be interesting. By the way, the sound quality may not be 100% perfection, but this was the best we could do on the fly. So hopefully it'll be good enough. I'll try to optimize that for you. So Brian, heading into the show, I want to frame this up, and you can tell me like kind of whether you agree or not, and then you can kind of tell me how much the show changed this. So the question sort of becomes, why should we care about Acumatica, right? And I think there's a few reasons, really good reasons why, if you track the sort of modern ERP market to track Acumatica. One is that they do a number of things differently, including pricing that's much closer to consumption-based pricing than anything else in the industry. They've been known to take kind of bold steps on behalf of reducing customer friction in ERP, including their customer bill of rights, which you could argue, yeah, words only go so far, but it also does at least put up something that you're going to be held accountable to. Acumatica has also been a bit of a trailblazer in what you would call industry ERP or industry cloud ERP, if you want, whatever. The point is really having a lot of success with verticals, to the point that I think it was a couple years ago where they were getting to 70% of their sales were around their vertical solutions. And one of the things I particularly like about their verticals, and they did recently announce another one this fall, professional services, is that because they have a strong retail vertical and strong commerce solutions, that really helps with the blurring of the lines between B2B and B2C, and giving a lot of manufacturers running Acumatica who want to start operating storefronts and dealing with commerce and dealing with customers the opportunity to do that. So there's a lot of things I really like about Acumatica and think are important to track. The AI part has been interesting because Acumatica has been very, very intentional about automating a lot of internal workflows, but being careful about not going crazy over new technology. I used to praise Acumatica, for example, for not overhyping blockchain and not getting overexcited about it. But I think they were running a little bit of a risk with AI, that they were maybe proceeding at a more deliberate pace, perhaps than like a trailblazing pace, for the very reason that they're really careful about their phrase around, technology, whatever that works for you. They really want it to work inside the context of their market. So they don't buy into the hype. But I was wondering a little bit how that would fare this year. So Brian, do you think that's sort of would you add anything to that, like in terms of setting the stage for this year?
So AI was definitely the top subject for the show, where maybe they didn't talk as much about it in the prior year. They more than made up for it this time around. The question really wasn't, should we use AI in some of these functions? It was like, what's the best way to do it? Now, their whole approach is they really pounded on this message about, we want to have an AI first kind of strategy. And I know you and I've heard another vendor to say that in the past, but unlike so many competitors that just that sprinkle a little bit of like some generative AI on this function, and here's a little agentic love here, and here's a little algorithmic kind of thing going on somewhere else. These guys, they were demonstrating things where information you could tell was coming from everywhere, all over the Acumatica universe, and was populating everything from workflows and report content and so forth, and directing the customer to things that I would tell you don't even resemble like transaction workflows the way we used to know them, where they were bounded on both sides. Like if this is an accounts payable workflow, it never once varied really out of accounts payable till maybe you got to the end of the workflow. And then it was like, okay, time to now button up these journal entries and send them to the general ledger. This stuff, it's maybe the word would be more like boundaryless. It just goes all over, it touches everything if you let it. That would be one thing. And clearly the AI was a major item. Now, I want to balance that with a degree of sensitivity that they have that, some of their customers at the show were obvious that they've grown tremendously. One customer, they've grown inorganically, organically, and globally. And they started off as a typical kind of QuickBooks graduate kind of customer that now is operating in something like 6 different countries and. I mean, it's incredible amount of growth. Now you have that kind of customer, and yes, they like to hear all about the AI stuff. But the small company or new customer that just is graduating out of QuickBooks, well, they probably appreciate some of the AI capabilities, but some of the rest of it's really kind of an overreach for them. It's either not appropriate or it's too complicated for the simplistic nature of their business today. Sorry for the long answer, but
no, that makes a lot of sense. So Brian, walk us through a little bit. We're recording this towards the end of day 2, which is sort of the end of the media analyst program. Mm-hmm. The conference continues for another day, but walk us through a little bit. Like I heard, for example, that yesterday's keynote was a little slow on the news. So tell us a little bit about how this unfolded for you from the first day, and as the show kind of came to a head, like what you were learning.
See, I would say that in press parlance, they kind of buried the headline a little bit yesterday. So it didn't seem like as earth-shattering, the kind of news announcements that got on yesterday. But yesterday was really more about, I would say, the company and some directional kind of stuff. There was a little bit of tease on the AI side, but they were saving most of the technology talk for today. And that's what today was really all about. They had a really interesting morning keynote because they must have had 6 or 7 of their executives came out. Each one of them took a chunk of the critical technology. And then following that, there were another like 6 or 7 executives. Each one took on their industry. So we got updates on everything, construction, retail, you name it. Today, we learned more about how they've gotten even more closely connected to Shopify, for example, on the e-commerce side of the house. And yesterday also, I would tell you, it was about customers, and they had a couple of them that were really worth noting. One that I mentioned already was really into operating in all these other countries and as well as growing through acquisitions and organic growth. And the other one, was another one of these, like, just look how much a company how much growth can be supported with Acumatica's technology. And it kind of begs the question that I know we had this conversation with their management years ago about what are you going to do when you start growing up and your customers start to either outgrow your product, or you need to kind of bifurcate the business into 2 groups. And we heard a little bit in some of the management 101s where they're tweaking some of their pricing so as to be not so much user seat count, but more value added. But that's going to be an evolution for them over the next year or 2, because so much of the value, I think, is yet to be documented and known well with all the new AI capabilities. And apologies for the jets flying over. They're just getting warmed up for my appearance at McCarran. So anyway.
So I made a few observations from the press releases that pertain to AI that I want to really head to the jugular on those. But before I do that, tell us a little bit more about you're one of the people, for listeners who haven't experienced this, that is going to press the issue, right? Like, I know when your hand goes up in sessions, you're going to have a spicy question. And if you talk with a customer or partner, you're going to get something that other people don't get. So was there anything that really stood out for you this year in terms of just surprises, or something that those of us that are just following the event like I am from afar wouldn't have picked up on?
So I asked a question like that yesterday with the CEO and one other executive there. And it kind of hits your criteria. I was asking about the concept on affordability, because I heard 3 of their customers comment about why they chose Acumatica, and it was because, and each one of them on their own said something about affordability. They used that word. And I get it. I know their product costs less than so many of their competitors. But I was asking a question, what are you going to do structurally inside the company to make sure you continue to maintain a low-cost kind of solution? And at first, their CEO gave an answer that was really all about their partner channel business model, and that's what keeps their costs low, because they don't have a whole lot of sales and marketing expense. I get that. And I said, oh, yeah, but I wasn't asking about, your sales approach. I'm asking, what are you doing, like, say, with offshore? And I know you've had offshore capabilities in the past. Is that still going on? And he confirmed, oh, yeah, they're still going like gangbusters in Serbia and what's the other country? It'll come back to me in a moment. But anyway, they have big code farm operations in those places. I go, are you using AI, for example, to generate code? Yes. So they confirmed that. So it was like I had to crowbar the answers out to get that. But I think it's very important, because this is a company who's structured, who won and became a company of its own right by being a replacement for Dynamics or Solomon GL. And that was a very low cost product. And if they're going to maintain that kind of a position in the market, they got to keep working on some of those things to keep the costs in check.
Ladies and gentlemen, and vendors who invite Brian to their shows, just know that Brian's found a way to pack a crowbar in his suitcase and get it through TSA. So just be ready, because he's gonna pull that out during your exec session. Just so you know. Anyhow, Brian, I want to ask you something else, because this is another thing that I just cannot take a pulse on this week, which is, I think the other thing Acumatica always has going for it is a good sense of morale. They rely heavily on their partner channel for sales, and the way that their partners and customers interact at the show is always pretty vibrant. You get that sense that people feel like they're part of something valuable. Acumatica has been strong on community, and yet they do have these growth statistics that do raise flags for me a little bit. Can they keep that as they grow? Like, for example, they announced they're going to Seattle next year. One of the reasons is they've outgrown their venues. They've grown 40% since they first started in this venue in terms of attendees. I think there were 3,500 plus this year. Their customer growth counts continue in the same direction. What was your sense of that? Is Acumatica managing to kind of keep that Acumatica vibe during this growth?
So I saw positive, negative kind of points on that very issue, and glad you brought that up. One is, and I know I saw a video you and I shot like this 11 years ago at an Acumatica event, and I couldn't believe you were in a really nice sport coat and dress shirt. I mean, it was astonishing to me. But anyway, we've been doing this a while, and what happens here is, and I checked with one of the customers, as this company continues to grow, it's growing where the absolute number of customers is expanding, but also the top end of the customers are, there's more of these big companies, and they're stretching the limits even further on where they're going to take Acumatica into. This customer I just finished interviewing, he was expressing some, I would call it somewhat frustration, because for a few years, his employer was one of those darling, high volume, highly visible accounts that Acumatica had. But now they've been kind of, they're not as, visible or as important, because there's other bigger companies that are coming into the picture and into the fold. And those bigger companies are also competing for some of the scarcer, very technical talent that Acumatica may need to put on some customer engagements to kind of put out fires or do some enhancements. So when the company expands this way and this way, it's going to put tension on the relationship with those existing customers. And that tension is there, but is it like so big that it's putting a bad mood on the conference? Oh, no way. Not at all. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't there, but on the other hand, I wouldn't be telling the full story if I made you think that it was a major problem, because it really isn't. In fact, this is a problem I think a lot of vendors would love to have.
This is obviously in the category of good problems to have. And I really like, by the way, this scenario of companies growing much larger on the platform, because years ago, I remember talking to their leadership about this whole concept of grow with Acumatica as kind of an informal tagline. I don't think they've ever used it formally. But this idea that when you move off of these lower kind of legacy stuff, or, 12 complicated QuickBooks instances or whatever it is, and you move to Acumatica, the idea would be, as you grow and grow and grow, maybe you'll never leave Acumatica. You know what I mean? Like that you literally, it kind of stays with you through your whole sort of global success evolution. And I really like that. But I think what the conclusion that I take based on your comments and just my general sense is that, along with AI, pretty high on their to-do list is managing growth and figuring out how that works from a resource standpoint, a support standpoint, and just flat out making sure that customers feel heard, because that is going to change, right? Larger communities do get more complicated in terms of that sense of community. So
larger, more global, more complicated, whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to this. Something else that was kind of interesting, John, is you and I have been covering this vendor, seems like forever, and yet so many of the people, including one of the founders, they're right back on stage. I mean, some things just don't change, and I kind of like that constancy, to see some of that or continuity, I guess, in some of these vendor events. And boy, they know the story, the culture, the history, the product lines. They know all that stuff inside out and roundabout. So that I take as a very good sign.
Yeah, and a lot of former executives from Acumatica, you'll still see them at events. They're involved in the ecosystem in some ways, and that's really cool. You get that sense that people still feel a stake in it and still feel invested in it, and they didn't just take a golden parachute and just head out. So I really liked seeing that. Okay, let's get to AI a little bit, because I want to make a couple of observations. I did think that Acumatica in the past kind of perhaps underplayed the impact of AI, although I did like that they were resistant to the hype, but I felt like maybe it was time to lay out a more complete vision. Well, they certainly did that this time, and if you look at this day was the second day, so they had the second major press release. And they've now shifted to what they call an AI first product strategy. Prior to the summit, they put out principles of innovation that include things around the ethics of how they're going to conduct their AI development. They talk about Acumatica Labs and a customer review program, and Acumatica AI Studio and industry specific solutions. So I see like a really, really like dramatic shift in what Acumatica is trying to do. And also Acumatica Chief Engineering Officer Miten Mehta played a prominent role in the keynotes this year. So it seems to me that Acumatica is definitely now saying, like, they haven't ever said AI first in the past. So this is pretty significant for them because this is the first time a technology has come along where Acumatica has said, like, yeah, this is going to have a fundamental impact on our product.
So I think one of the things you couldn't appreciate from afar is that there was a lot of conversation in the sessions with the execs on how much time they spent this last year or two physically visiting with customers. Now, it wasn't to do the usual kind of glad handing, how you doing? We really love you as a customer, kind of those kind of visits. This is, we genuinely want to understand how your industry actually works and where the problem areas are that we could apply AI to go fix. It was interesting that the customer visits were first and foremost about not just improving the adoption and building out additional use cases around AI, because they weren't looking for the things that I make fun of all the time about the, sprinkling a little bit of, magic AI does to across the process. This was, let's fundamentally understand what it is you're trying to do and then go take all that back to their R&D labs and work on it. They reference that in their AI demos on kind of like why they were doing something very differently, because they noticed that's the kind of thing that a customer always does. It's like, as soon as they check this balance, boom, they go off to another application to go do something else. And then they're back doing a third thing. And they're like, why don't we just automate not just the movement, but also bring the data together at the exact point of need so no one has to go anywhere. So that was that was something that going to visit customers in the past was something that they always left up to partner firms. And now they're really taking ownership of this from an IP development kind of concept. And that's a good thing.
Well, I like hearing that because I believe that the sort of future, like adding AI into embedding it in a process is good, and the interactive stuff can be good. But I think the future is rethinking on an industry basis. And so I really like seeing the vertical emphasis. The other thing I also noted, John Case published this week on Diginomica a piece. And one of the things I liked about that piece, it was about reliable AI, but a key point in his emphasis was how important it is to taking care of data first is essential. AI amplifies the importance of data integrity, hygiene, and governance. And honestly, Brian, that's a message that I can't really get enough of these days, because so much of the AI conversation that I follow seems to want to fantasize that we don't really have to worry about feeding it customer specific and industry specific data. But in fact, if you take something off the shelf and try to ask it the kind of questions an Acumatica user has, if you don't have your own data feeding into it, I'm sorry, you're not going to get much that can help you in your job. You're just not at this point, unless you're just trying to write an email. And you can debate whether that's a awesome use case or not. But to me, having someone help me write an email, that's really on the low end of anything useful.
So you'll like this pesky question I asked of Ollie. And I said, your customers, a lot of them are migrating off like QuickBooks to become, a customer of yours, but some aren't, and they're on other things. But what they know about the software world is probably a decade old, based on the last solutions that they went shopping for. And I know that's what's going on because I'm out there all the time helping clients. And what do I see? They're still using the old RFIs from, 10, 15 years ago with the same function feature questions. They do not know what is the art of the possible. I go, it's great that you guys are building all these AI tools, but I think you need some sales enablement and partner enablement, intellectual property, whatever, where you could actually sit down with a prospect and explain to them in a very different way than the old functions features. This is what you could do. This is how you could structure your company.
Yeah.
This is how what fulfillment looks like, for example, order fulfillment in a highly modern, relevant, competitive firm. And there was some quiet and we have to do more of that. So, they know the point, and it's going to require the development of this stuff and I think some additional partner training to help educate prospects along the way on the art of the possible.
Pesky questions alive and well in Las Vegas. That gives me encouragement in the back cave, because it's hard to ask them from here. The other thing that I think is really worth noting around the AI piece is, and I need to dig into this further, I hope to do a deeper dive with Acumatica at some point on this, but reference to private LLMs was encouraging to me, because that solves a lot of the customer data movement questions. If indeed it looks like all of their AI architecture is internal, that's pretty rare. Even very large vendors like SAP and Oracle are relying on external large language models at this time. So I thought that was interesting. I'll need to get more details, so listeners take that with a slight grain of salt, but that commitment to customer data privacy sounds good to me. And I think we are headed for a very interesting phase, like you're describing, Brian, in terms of customer experimentation, because I just wrote about the impact of DeepSeek, which has kind of flustered the AI markets and the stock market with the Chinese startup. But the big takeaway there is making LLMs easier to train and more affordable to train. That lands right in your art of the possible discussion, because that brings things into play that even some weeks ago would have been a little more out of price range of most customers. And so I think vendors who can work closely with customers and collaborate on new use cases, train models with their data and their industry's data, that's going to be where a lot of the action is. So it will be interesting to see.
No argument on that. The LLM and the privacy and security conversations, they were definitely here. There wasn't anything that, jumped out that made me think wow, that's a really new and amazing idea. But customers clearly don't want, this was abundantly clear. They don't want their data ever showing up in some other LLM or whatever training database for another company. So they know it, they've heard it, they've planned on that. That's part of the way they've architected their solutions. Well,
yep. So one more thing, Brian, because I wanted to hit on this, and it's something, and I don't know, because I wasn't there and didn't have a chance to ask, if Acumatica kind of anticipated this, but I thought their day one press release, Acumatica Summit, showcases ERP's critical role in elevating business performance, which is a little bit of a mouthful, of course. But it is a press release, so to speak. But I thought what was really interesting about this, and I don't know how intentional this is on Acumatica's part, but I think a lot of ERP vendors could learn from this in terms of a couple of things. First, asserting the importance of cloud ERP and a real-time data platform in some kind of a transformational effort in your industry, or to compete in your industry, or however you want to put it. Because a lot of times ERP doesn't have that sex appeal anymore, and people want to invest in customer-facing projects or whatever. So that's really interesting. But the second part, Brian, and you and I have both written on this on Diginomica, is that there's a lot of carnival barkers in the AI world, and also some people that I respect, such as Satya Nadella, who have sort of basically said, agentic AI spells the end of SaaS, and, in pretty evangelical terms. And so I think it was a good time for Acumatica to kind of reassert the value of a structured ERP system with automated workflows and how AI can work with that. And Acumatica articulated a few different kinds of AI activities, including having an interactive advisor, having intelligent automation, and there was one other I'll get to in a sec. But the point is, it was all in the context of these ERP workflows. And so in a way that I think Acumatica really did anticipate that debate that people have been having. And I think I know where you land. I land pretty firmly on the side that that's a gross exaggeration of what agentic AI is going to be able to do in the near future. But at the same time, it doesn't mean put your head in the sand and hope it goes away, because it's actually really important. But anyway, I thought Acumatica anticipated that really well in that news announcement.
Well, of course, you had to come in with the trenchant comment. That's your key word, but I beat you to it anyway.
Trenchant. Someone says bingo, man. We got a winner card once again. Congratulations.
Yeah, this whole issue of really what is ERP got some traction with some of the analysts I was hanging around with today at lunchtime, because it's clear that what we used to know as an application or a function, it's gotten so blurred up now when you can see all the different things that you could bring together on a screen. It's sort of like the whole suite goes away, and what you're left with is just this one screen that a user can be pulling information, or is getting information served up to them and insights, everything else from all over the organization. So the user walking around and going through all these different applications to pick up a bit of data here and there, that's an old model that just isn't really relevant anymore. Unfortunately, I don't think most of the world in the ERP community has figured that out yet. There's, again, the ones who are still sprinkling AI on old application models are still stuck in the past. They have yet to reimagine what the business world looks like in a AI-empowered technology world.
Yes, and true. And I think the user interface changes will come, and sometimes fairly quickly, because it will make a lot less sense to navigate screens once you start to trust that.
But this isn't a UI.
No.
It's how work gets done, and how do we redesign work is really what it boils down to.
Right. But it starts with interacting with your system in a different way, and then your expectations around how work gets done go right along with that, I think. And I think it's important that companies like Acumatica realize that things are shifting, but they also need to assert their relevance in the face of some pretty religious AI individuals, because if you listen to that AI religion too much, what the conclusion you'll reach is that I shouldn't buy software right now. And I disagree with that. So I think it's a much more complicated question than that. And so I thought Acumatica, from where I sit, which is why I want to say it to you, because you sit a lot closer to what's going on than me, I thought they were pretty coherent on that point this week. Brian, are you muted? Unmute yourself. There you go. Sorry, folks. That was Brian on mute. So, Brian, now you're off mute. Let's hear what you have to say.
I was just going to say, this timing problem, it's not a new problem. And I faced this with I wanted to buy a new car with all the new technology and upgrades, and then the pandemic hit, so it delayed my purchase, but I still eventually ended up with something. I think these customers, they're going to get the new kind of world. It's going to come to the question is really just a timing issue and a robustness of the new technology that's going to come out. And do you wait for it and be a laggard or a late adopter, or do you rush into it and take on all the risks that come with being an early adopter or an innovator? And that's going to be that's not a new problem. That's a well-documented technology adoption issue.
I wish buyers luck trying to sort that out, because the level of propaganda is quite high. I would encourage customers to evaluate pros and cons very carefully right now. It's hard to demo some of this stuff. You really have to see it with your own data, and ideally work with vendors you trust to make sure you're really identifying all the implications. So anyhow, with that little pulpit speech done, Brian, I think we are done. I did want to mention briefly, because I ran through those three things, the three things Acumatica was emphasizing around AI were the intelligent advisor, automation, and interactive assistance, which was that sort of UI part that Brian and I were just talking about. So that was what was presented. I think Brian gave us a good view of the ground. Brian, final words before we wrap.
I think we hit almost all the main high points. I'll have some time on the long flight back home tonight. If I think of something else, I'll append it or I'll do a diginomic piece on it. But I think we got it. We got the headlines here for sure.
Excellent. Well, Brian's got to hit the road. I've got to hit the vitamin C stash, but we made it happen despite the logistics. So thanks, Brian, for joining and reviewing the show with me, as always.